Hey everybody, Chris here from It's Made, and I have one question for you. Are you wanting to save time removing supports and save filament? Then this is your video. So let's go ahead and get into it. So do you find yourself with your 3D prints, they have way too many supports, or on the other side of that, you don't have enough supports and your prints keep failing? So no matter what side of the camp you're on, this video is going to help you for sure. Because we're going to dive deep into the Bambu Studio custom supports. We're going to talk about how to paint on supports and how to remove supports. And the most important, how to identify when you actually need supports. Oh, real quick. I just wanted to say thank you because I just hit 50,000 subscribers and it's kind of crazy. I cannot believe the growth that this channel has had, and it's just been a wild and amazing ride because this community and all of you are so amazing. It has been so much fun making all of these videos and teaching people everything about 3D printing and painting 3D prints. It is my passion, and I hope it shows because it is so much fun to do, and I cannot wait for the next 50,000. And all I can say is just thank you so much because I know it would have not happened without all of you. So I guess I'm going to say thank you one more time because it's amazing. So before we even get onto the supports, I think the biggest thing is understanding orientation. When it comes to all of the questions I get about supports, when to add them and how to remove them, honestly, a lot of it boils down to you're not using the right orientation for your model. Now, what I mean by orientation is we have our build plate, and it's how we're actually angling this when it comes to our 3D print. Because if we're doing it like, say, this, we're going to need supports. But if we turn it like this, we don't need supports. So when you orient your model in certain ways, you can actually remove the amount of supports that you actually need. So I have this Spider-Man, and it's already printed with its supports. And you can see that I only needed 3 pillars of supports because it's oriented this way. If I would have laid it flat, I would have had to put all of the supports on the back, and it wouldn't have looked as nice and clean. So it really depends on how you are laying this out. So I have this Hellboy bust, and it is actually support free because of the angle it's actually printing. But when it comes into my actual slicer, it came in like this. So if I would have just left it like this and printed it, I would have had so many supports on the back of the head, on the back of the arms, in all kinds of areas. But putting it like this, suddenly I don't need any supports. So when we're about to support something, that's the biggest thing we need to look at first. How am I rotating this model to be able to remove as many supports as possible? So that is one of the biggest things when it comes to your models before you even start supporting them. Making sure you have the right orientation to get the least amount of supports as possible. So let's jump over to Bambu Studio, and I'm going to show you some different examples of how we can orient models to be able to get the least amount of supports as possible. Alright, so I have some different models I'm going to go over just to kind of show you what I'm talking about. Now, the first thing I have here is this sword. Now, what I want to do is make sure I can get the least amount of supports when it comes to printing this. I've sliced this, and you can see exactly how this came in, and I'm going to have supports all the way through here. So, honestly, one side of this is not going to look very good. So what can we do about that? So I'm going to go ahead and go back to prepare. So first we have this lay on face tool. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. Now, this is a really good indicator to show you where of those big, flat spots are, so you can actually 3D print it. Now, this doesn't always help you, but in this situation it does. Because if I click right here on the bottom of the handle, you can see that it is going to print straight up and down now. Now, I'm not going to have any supports on this part of the blade. Now, the hilt I will.
So if I slice this, and now we see what it's looking like, so we can see once it's sliced, it's only going to be supporting underneath the hilt right here and a little bit on the handle, even though it doesn't look like we would need it there. But we can address that later. Now this would allow us to be able to get a really nice and clean, smooth print because, I mean, most of this, look at it, like we're going to be able to print this just fine. And one of the other things we always want to do is we want to look up underneath it. So we can just rotate and look underneath, or we can come all the way down here and then look to make sure that this is going to give us a nice first layer. So this is actually going to look really good because I think this could print just perfectly. So let's move on to the next model. So I have this cool Deadpool from Nom Nom Figures, and it actually has this little, let's just say, inappropriate sign because of what it says, the letters. So we need to figure out, we saw that it came in a weird way because right here is not really the greatest way of printing this. So let me just go ahead and put this on its own build plate just so we can get a better look. So let's slice this and see what it's going to look like right now. So it's going to give us a lot of supports on these edges, and they're hard edges. So it's not like there's some really soft gradations here for us. Now, the thing is we've got this big flat space, so let's check that out. Let's go ahead, come back here, and if I go to my lay on face, and you can see that this is all broken up. And this will actually give you a good indicator that this is not a perfectly flat surface. So I'm going to go ahead and click the biggest one and let that lay on face. Then I'm going to slice it again. Now you can see that it is giving us some supports where these overhangs are, and this is looking pretty good. Now we're going to have to check the very bottom layer. So I'm going to come all the way down, and then you can see here, this purple right here, or bluish, this right here is our first layer. So we know that all of this right here, we're not going to actually be printing. So if I keep going, you can see these layers. So that is not going to give us that great of a first layer. It's going to look really bad. Now, for this exact instance, there are some things that I do sometimes. So let's jump back to prepare, and then what I'm going to do is actually cut this. So if I come right here to our cut tool, then what I'm going to do is I am going to bring this all the way down. So now what I'm going to do is just slice just a little bit off of this. So, and you can see the first layers right here. And I'm going to keep coming until it's got all of it. So I've basically just sliced off a little sliver of it. Now, this doesn't always work for all of your models, but for something like this, a little sign, I could absolutely do this to get a perfect first layer, and that means less failures for me. So I'm going to first click right here, cut to parts. Then I'm going to perform cut. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to split objects, and now I can see that there is my little sliver, and what I could do if I really wanted to keep this depth, I could just lay on face, click that, and it flips it. Now it's going to print that, and then I could just glue it on when I'm done 3D printing it. So let's just leave that for right now so you can see what that's going to look like. And let's slice this. So now when I look underneath here, look at that. This is perfect. This is a beautiful first layer. This one right here is going to be a good first layer as well. So I could technically do this and glue it on the back, but for something like this, it really doesn't matter because it's going to be putting into that background base piece. So I would be super happy with this. So this right here would definitely allow me to 3D print it with a minimal amount of supports. Now I don't have all of these supports where this gap was right here in this subtle gradation. Because not all of our models, when there's a flat surface, are completely flat, as you can see right here. So now I have this right here, the base that everything is sitting on. It's like the explosion with some clouds. Now, the first thing I want to do is look at this. So it comes in this way, and sometimes the modeler actually has already done the work for you and saying, okay, this is probably the best way for you to print this with the least amount of supports. So I'm going to go ahead and slice this, and let's see what it looks like when we actually get it all So let's see what it looks like once it's all supported, because there is a lot here that is not touching the ground. So we can see that there are a ton of supports when it comes to this base just like this. So let's go ahead, go back, and now we're going to lay on face again, and we can see the big flat spot. So now let's go ahead and slice this again and see what this is going to look like. So once we look through here, we can see that there are a whole lot less of supports when it comes to putting it this way. Now, this one's pretty easy just because it's got a big flat surface and you would just assume that that's what it would be. But sometimes that's not always the case because there might be so many overhangs, it might make more sense to tilt it back. But that's what you really want to do when it comes to all of this. You want to look at it and see, okay, what is the best way that I can actually do this without having so many supports? So we also have this little comic book looking explosion in the background and these swords. So, and the sheath. Now, if looking at this, we got to see, okay, what makes sense here? Like, does it make sense to be able to print it like this? Because if I slice this, we're going to see that it's going to give us a lot of supports here, underneath here, and the entire back of this. So we can see, look at that, like that is a ton of supports. So what can we do to get rid of a lot of these? And that is all about orientation. So let's go back to prepare, and if we go ahead and do lay flat, we can see that there are a bunch of different big flat surfaces, and this is the part where that is not always the best solution because we're going to get the same thing. So if I look down here on the bottom, maybe I'm going to have to print it like this. So that will be able to print and look really good. And also maybe we could do it right here. So that could give us a few good pieces to be able to get stuck to the build plate. Now, before we slice it, let's look at this one. Now, this one right here has some bigger pieces to be able to see how to lay this perfectly flat. Now, I think it would look a lot better like this, so we have less of an angle when we're actually printing this, and then we don't need supports up here. So let's look at these two now just by turning them a little bit to be able to see what we can possibly print without as many supports. So we can see here that this is actually giving us less supports on this, so instead of this entire face, but there's some areas that are giving us supports that we really just don't need them. And that's where later on we're going to go over some of this to show you how we can reduce some of the supports that it's producing. So looking through here, this is looking a lot better. And also kind of seeing some of this, we definitely don't need those supports. So now you've seen how we can rotate some of these models to be able to reduce the amount of supports we need.
Alright, real quick, I just have to say thank you. Thank you to all of these amazing people for supporting me on Patreon this month. If you want to be like these people, you will get exclusive access to my private Discord servers where we talk about everything 3D printing, softwares, failures, and some really sweet painting projects. So, I'll put a link down below if you're interested. Other than that, let's get back to the video. So before we get off of the orientation issue, I just wanted to make sure that we fully understand some of the different scenarios. Because sometimes when we're 3D printing something, it is unavoidable. We absolutely need supports. And we're going to need a lot of supports to be able to print it in a certain way. So, the thing is we need to think about what are we willing to sacrifice? And what do I mean by sacrifice? I mean, there are certain times when we're 3D printing these things and we're going to have a lot of supports. Now, we have to make a decision. Where are all of these supports going to go? Can we orient our model in a certain way to where all of the supports are in one area? And that area, is it a highly viewed area or a less viewed area? Because let's say that I have this bust and it wasn't support free. Now, if I was going to print this, I would not print it face down like this because all of these supports were going to be all over the face. Instead, I am going to turn it around. That way, when I'm actually getting all of these supports on there, I know that the face of this, where everybody's going to see because it's going to be displayed, it's going to look pristine and really nice. And another example is with this figure. Say if you're printing some minis for D&D. Now, there is some things that like you're just going to have supports for. So it might be better to just lay it back at an angle. That way, at least the face of that figure is going to look as nice as possible. And that's what I mean about sacrificing. Where am I willing to have supports, and where do I just don't want supports in any way? Those are the things that you just need to keep in the back of your head before you even start adding supports to your 3D prints. So now let me just step down from my soapbox when it comes to orientation, and let's jump into Bambu Studio so I can show you how to customize supports and some settings that will really help you when it comes to adding supports to your models.
So let's talk about painting on supports and removing supports. Now, first I want to show you one of the best settings that is for some reason hidden in Bambu Studio. So first, we need to see where we need to add supports and where we don't need supports. So let's go over here to the little drop-down menu and go to View. Then from View, let's go to Show Overhangs and check that. Now, you are looking at this and wondering, what in the heck did that do? Now, if I rotate around here, if I click on my build plate and I rotate around, now you can see all of these highlighted areas. These highlighted areas are areas that are going to be supported when I 3D print this. So first, let's go ahead, create another build plate, and let's move this little puff of smoke over so we can just isolate that and look at that. So we can see right here, we have some different colors. The first thing is obviously the color of our filament. So this could be a different color for you depending on what filament you're using. So if I'm actually using my black filament, it could look like that. So that could change. But what doesn't change is the red. The red is your overhangs. This is what you need to support. And also, you'll see right here, there is a light blue color. That color is your first layer. So if I actually come over here, so if I come back to our base and I go underneath here, you can see that our first layer, the very smooth first layer we have, is all blue. And all of the other things are red that needs overhangs. So let's come back to our puff of smoke we've got right here. And we are going to go ahead and orient our model in a way to where we're going to have the least amount of overhangs. This is what I like to do. I like to just select my model, get underneath it, then I'm going to start rotating this until I see the least amount of supports. So I can see here, if I keep going like this, when it comes to the comparison of the model and that amount of supports, that looks actually pretty good. Realizing we see this little tiny tip, and this is not ideal when it comes to 3D printing, but we're going to be able to give a little bit of a base here when it comes to printing this. And those are the things to realize when we're painting on our own supports. We can make our own structure, that way it prevents us from failing. So, now that I have this in the way I want, let's come over here to our supports painting. So I'm going to click that button, and now you're going to see it isolates our model so there's nothing else around here. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate underneath here, and I am going to start painting. But the first thing I just wanted to show you, up here we have different tools. So if you're familiar with painting your models when it comes to the different colors with your AMS, this is pretty much the same tool set. So we can see we have a circle, we have a sphere, we have a fill, which is a paint bucket, then we have our gap fill for when we're missing little triangles and things like that. So let's start painting on some supports. So I'm going to use the sphere right here. I'm going to click that, then I'm going to left click and hold down and draw out some supports. So you can see right here, it's going to create some blue highlighted areas for us. So I can keep going all the way around and painting these areas. Now, this is the nice thing about this. Let's just say like, oh, I'm painting too big of an area and I only want to get right here where it says it's needing. So all I have to do is come right here to the top on overhangs only. We can check that, and now look at this. I can literally just fill in where it says, like I'm going back and forth and going like crazy here, and it is only giving it to me where it says it needs it. So this is a really cool feature, and it really does help to have your show overhangs on. So that way you're not overloading on the supports when you don't really need to. Now, let's say that I've painted too much. This is the great thing. You can right-click and drag, and that will actually remove your supports that you've painted. But right now, it's only going to work inside these areas that need supports because I still have on overhangs only. So let me just check that. Now it's turned off. So I can right-click and drag, and you can see that there is red right here. Red means there are no supports. So even if it wants to put supports there, we are not going to allow it to have supports. So if you see on your model that there are some areas that you don't want, this is the way to do it. So now we can see I have all of this. Now, if I'm looking at this right and I can see, okay, I don't think it's going to need it right here. So I can just do this, and I can increase my size too to make it a lot easier for me. So right click is remove supports, left click is add supports. So you can see that. So let me just undo what we just did here, and I am going to remove supports right here, and I'm going to keep looking around, and I think I don't need them right here either. And looking at everything, it looks like I have supports everywhere I need. So I'm going to put some just right there, and that should be good. Now, this is the part where we can paint our supports on to give it a firmer foundation. That way, you can see how top-heavy this is. It's not going to fall over, because if I'm printing just on this little bit right here, it is going to fall and it's going to fail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint right here like this. That way, we're going to have some really good foundations. Now, do I need to have this much? Maybe not, but it's not going to hurt me, because also this area is going in the peg, in the base of the 3D model. So I really don't care what this looks like. So let's go ahead and slice this just so I can give you an idea of what this looks like. So there we go. We can see that we have got a very nice foundation here. It is supporting our areas. That way we're not going to have any failures until we get up here, and the supports will help the rest of the model. So we can see that I think we are good. Now, it will show us where some overhangs are, but look at how small that is. Like, honestly, I find it hard to believe that my printer won't be able to accommodate when it comes to that overhang. And also when we're coming down here, when it's coming out. Like, I think we can do that too. I don't think we need those supports. Now, the last thing I really haven't mentioned, but I've kind of shown, is the difference between auto and manual. Now, if I go to manual, it is only going to add supports where I paint supports, and that's the big thing to understand here. Auto is going to add supports where it thinks it needs it, but you can paint on supports, and it will just add to those supports that are already there. Or vice versa, if I'm painting away supports to not have them in a certain area, it's just going to remove those and then support the rest of the model. But when it comes to our normal manual for tree and normal, those two, you have to paint your entire model. So make sure you understand the differences. I personally like to do tree auto with some tree slim or tree organic. Those are some of my favorite ones to use. Now, when it comes to using the two types of manual supports, I would just say be careful if you're just doing that. If you're looking at a very simple model and saying, okay, I only need to add a little bit of a support right here and that's it, then that might be the best bet for you. But if you have a very complex model, it is super easy to miss things, and that's how you can get failures. That's why I like to let Bambu Studio automatically add where it needs them, and then I will adjust them from there.
Now, sometimes you'll have a model that has a lot of little islands. And what do I mean by islands? Islands are those little areas that don't have anything to print on and when you need supports. So if I have my arm like this, the tip of my elbow would be an island because there's nothing underneath here, and I need to have a support to come up to it to be able to make sure it prints properly. So What I'm going to do is I want to jump over to Bambu Studio again, and I'm going to show you section view, because this is an amazing tool if you use it right to be able to detect islands easily. So let's jump back to the computer so I can show you section view.
So section view is fantastic to use, and if you're unfamiliar with it, it is right here, and it's honestly in a lot of different menus. So like even when you're painting your parts, you can see section view right here, and it's also right here in our support painting tool. So if I move this back and forth, you can see it's actually cutting away my model to the point where I can easily get to different areas. Realizing this little baby unicorn is pretty easy to get to, but this is really helping you understand what it's doing. Now, this is the big thing of how to properly use this. Now, you want to go from a very top view. This is what I like to do. Then start cutting away some, and then right here, you want to hit Reset Direction. And what is that going to do for you? Basically, it is changing the orientation of the cut. So now it is actually perfect with the view that I'm looking at from the top. So once I've reset my view, I'm going to go all the way underneath here and start dragging my selection view. Now, if you notice how it's actually showing, that is being able to identify your islands easily. So these islands are going to need supports, and you can see that they're red and they are going to support, but honestly, I'm going to add a little more. So I'm going to just keep going, and I can see that right here, when this starts to show up, it's going to need supports, but it has it, and I can just expand some of these supports. So the nice thing is when I am actually painting it, so this area, it's only painting it on the area exposed. So you can see here, when I move my expand, there's my hard line. So it is already accommodated for that. Now I know I'm going to be able to have enough supports to be able to print this beautifully. So if I slice this, then I see that all of my supports are showing up exactly where I wanted them, and this is going to print just fine.
So now you know how to add and remove supports, and this is especially helpful when you get a little more advanced and you've been printing for a little while and you get a good feel for your printer. Because you know, like, okay, I know this angle, it says I need supports, but I don't need them. I know it's going to print it. And that's where removing supports and adding supports, I mean, it's so useful. And if you mess this up in the beginning, don't fret, because it just takes time and experience. Because with every single failure, you learn something. Because you're like, okay, I realize just like last time, I can't do it like this. But if I angle it and get the orientation right, I'll have less supports. And then it'll be an even better print than last time. Because a few dozen prints from now, you're going to be a master of it. And you're going to be setting everything in the right orientation and the right supports. And every single thing is going to be just perfect. Well, as perfect as it can be with a 3D printer. So now that we've covered how to orient your model and how to add and remove supports, I have an upcoming video that is going to explain how to remove supports, because sometimes it can be tricky with models to be able to remove the supports. And I've got some tips and tricks that I'm really excited to share with you in this upcoming video. So until then, I wish you a great day, and I will go ahead and see you in the next video.